You're nominated tonight.
I'm nominated, so this is very exciting to me.
It was a quiet, sleepless dawn in Palm Springs. The kind of silence that holds its breath before the sun decides to rise. Inside a small hospice room, under a thin blanket and the faint hum of oxygen, Sally Kirkland, the woman who once dared Hollywood to look beyond its own fear, took her final breath. It was 50 amperes. Tuesday the 11th of November 2025. She was 84 years old. Her longtime representative, Michael Green, confirmed the news hours later. She will be deeply missed. Those 5 words carried the weight of 6 decades in film, on stage, and in the hearts of those who knew her. Sally had been living her final chapter with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd seen every shade of fame and solitude. For months, she had battled dementia, her mind flickering between memories of red carpets and distant laughter. A fall in the shower just weeks earlier had changed everything. 4 fractured vertebrae, a broken wrist, a shattered hip, and a series of infections that left her body frail but her spirit unbroken. Friends set up a small GoFundMe for her medical care, never knowing it would soon become her farewell. In her last days, she rarely spoke. When she did, her words carried the same poetic weight that once defined her career. "Don't say I died," she told a close friend. "Say I passed on into the spirits." Actress Jennifer Tilly, who once worked with Sally, later shared that line online, a line that spread like a soft whisper across Hollywood. There was no grand performance, no spotlight, no applause. Only the gentle rhythm of a heart slowing after a lifetime of giving everything to art. Outside, Palm Springs was still asleep. Inside, an era of fearless, unfiltered artistry had just drawn its final curtain. How did this once radical muse of Andy Warhol become one of Hollywood's most overlooked legends? Her story, bold, beautiful, and haunting, begins in New York City, where the girl who would one day defy every rule was first taught how to pose for a camera. Long before the Golden Globes, before the glitter of Hollywood and the whispers of controversy, there was simply a little girl in Manhattan, curious, dreamy, and already aware that the world noticed her. Sally Kirkland was born on the 31st of October 1941 in New York City, into a family where elegance met ambition. Her mother, Sally Kirkland Sr., was a celebrated fashion editor for Vogue and Life, a woman whose days revolved around couture and cameras. Her father, Frederick Kirkland, was a metals dealer, practical, grounded, and quietly protective of his only daughter. From the start, young Sally lived in a world where beauty was a profession. By the age of 5, she was modeling dresses too big for her shoulders, holding poses longer than any child should. Yet behind the camera's flash, she sensed something missing, a voice, a soul, something deeper than just looking perfect. As a teenager, she would slip away from her mother's fashion shoots to watch Broadway performers rehearse, mesmerized by the raw honesty that modeling couldn't offer. Her mother had taught her how to stand tall. Theater, she would later say, taught her how to fall apart. Determined to break free from the glossy perfection of the fashion world, Sally enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the same institution that had trained Grace Kelly and Robert Redford. There, she studied under Philip Burton, the mentor of Richard Burton, and Lee Strasberg, the godfather of method acting. Strasberg's philosophy to live the emotion, not fake it, would define her forever. Her classmates remembered her as the girl who felt too much. While others acted, Sally experienced. She wept when the script demanded a tear. She trembled when the scene called for fear. She wasn't pretending. She was becoming. In smoky Manhattan coffeehouses, she read poetry to friends and strangers alike, quoting Rilke and Tennessee Williams. Those who met her then would later say it was obvious. Sally Kirkland was never meant to be ordinary. She was born to chase truth, even if it meant breaking every rule along the way. And that moment came soon enough in the late 1960 seconds, when she stepped onto an off-Broadway stage and shocked an entire generation with one of the most daring performances in American theater history. By the end of the 1,960 seconds, New York was alive, with rebellion, art, music, and politics all colliding in one restless heartbeat. In the middle of it stood Sally Kirkland, no longer the fashion editor's daughter, but a woman determined to redefine what acting could mean. She spent her nights drifting between Greenwich Village cafes, Andy Warhol's factory, and off-Broadway rehearsal rooms where scripts were scribbled on napkins and boundaries meant nothing. Warhol saw her and instantly understood. This woman was art in motion. He photographed her, painted her, and soon after named her one of his 13 most beautiful women in 1964, a declaration that would follow her forever. But beauty was never her destination. Sally wanted danger, honesty, and transformation. She found it in a play called Sweet Eros. Written by Terrence McNally, it told the story of a kidnapped woman stripped not just of her clothes, but of her control, her pride, and finally her fear. It was brutal, psychological, and it terrified most actresses. Sally said yes. When she appeared completely nude on stage in 1968, audiences gasped, critics panicked, and history was made. She became the first American actress to perform fully nude in an off-Broadway production. Some called it obscene. Others called it genius. Sally called it truth. In interviews years later, she would say she wasn't chasing attention, she was chasing honesty. That moment, she said, wasn't about the body. It was about freedom. Time magazine later dubbed her the latter-day Isadora Duncan of nudo-thespianism. Half mockery, half admiration. It didn't matter. For Sally, the controversy was worth it. She had broken through the walls that kept women ornamental, voiceless, decorative. That raw defiance would shape every role she took afterward. Casting directors began to whisper her name in equal parts, awe and hesitation. She wasn't safe. They said she was real. And while Hollywood was slow to embrace such authenticity, the moment was coming when Sally's fearless energy would find its stage under the brightest lights of all. She was about to take her first steps west, straight into the world of cinema that would both crown her and consume her. When Sally Kirkland finally set foot in Hollywood, she arrived not as another pretty face from New York, but as a woman already branded by risk, the kind of actress casting directors whispered about with both admiration and fear. She had no intention of blending in. "I didn't come to fit their mold," she would later say. "I came to melt it." Her first real breakthrough came quietly. It was 1973, and George Roy Hill's crime classic The Sting was about to explode into one of the biggest films of its time. Sally appeared briefly alongside Paul Newman and Robert Redford, her energy so natural that even in a short scene, she stood out. That same year, she played opposite Barbra Streisand in The Way We Were, proving that she could hold her own among Hollywood royalty. Directors took note. Sally had something that others didn't, a kind of volcanic authenticity. While many actresses performed to be loved, Sally acted to be understood. Her eyes burned with life, her gestures unpredictable, her presence impossible to ignore. Throughout the 1,970 seconds, she worked tirelessly small parts, television, cameos, independent scripts nobody else wanted. Each role, she said, was a chance to speak for the misfits. When offers from the major studios didn't come, she built her own path, working in films that explored identity, sexuality, and the messy contradictions of being human. Her reputation grew not through fame, but through whispers in the industry. If you want real emotion, get Sally. She became the actress other actors studied, the one directors called when they wanted chaos to look poetic. By the early 1,980 seconds, Sally was a familiar figure at casting calls and Hollywood parties, instantly recognizable by her blonde hair, deep eyes, and that defiant smile. But beneath the surface, she was restless. She'd watched too many actresses fade into silence once they hit 40. She refused to be one of them, so she waited patient, fearless, and certain that the role she was meant to play hadn't found her yet. Then, in 1987, it finally did. a low-budget drama about a forgotten actress struggling to start over. A story that mirrored her own life so perfectly it felt like fate. The film was called Anna. In 1987, a film few people expected to matter suddenly changed everything. Its title was Anna, a quiet, introspective story about an aging Czech actress living in exile, trying to rebuild her life in America while mentoring a younger starlet. The budget was small, the crew modest, but for Sally Kirkland, it was the role of a lifetime. Because in truth, Anna wasn't just a character. It was a mirror. At that point, Sally had been in Hollywood long enough to know what it felt like to be forgotten. She had spent years watching younger actresses take the parts she once dreamed of, smiling through parties where no one remembered her last film. When she read Anna, she wept. "It was me," she said later. "It was my loneliness, my hope, my fight to stay alive in an industry that loves you one day and ignores you the next." The transformation was electric. On screen, Sally poured every scar of her career into Anna's weary eyes, the vulnerability of loss, the pride of survival, the quiet ache of being invisible in a city obsessed with youth. Her performance was raw, messy, and utterly human. Critics didn't just notice. They were stunned. In early 1988, her name was suddenly everywhere. The Los Angeles Times called her performance a blazing comet of truth. She won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture. Drama, standing on stage in a crimson gown beside Michael Douglas, who that same night claimed Best Actor for Wall Street. For a brief, golden moment, Sally was the face of Hollywood courage, proof that persistence could still triumph over age and odds. And then came the Oscar nomination. For one shimmering season, her name appeared beside legends Cher for Moonstruck, Glenn Close for Fatal Attraction, Holly Hunter for Broadcast News, and Meryl Streep for Ironweed. It was a class of giants, and Sally stood among them, radiant and fearless. When her name wasn't called on Oscar night, she smiled anyway. For her, the nomination itself was victory. The world had finally seen what she'd been all along. "It wasn't about winning," she later said. "It was about being remembered." Yet fame, like Hollywood's spotlight, has a cruel memory. After Anna, the offers that came were strange, smaller, riskier, sometimes exploitative. But Sally took them all. She refused to fade quietly. "I've played queens and junkies, saints and sinners," she once said. "I'd rather die trying to be real than live being fake." The years that followed would prove her words true as her career drifted towards spiritual transformation, teaching, and a deeper calling beyond the screen. After the storm of Anna came a quiet awakening. While many actors would have chased the next award, Sally Kirkland turned inward. Fame had given her applause, but not peace. Hollywood had crowned her, then moved on as it always does. Yet, rather than fight the fading light, she began searching for something deeper, meaning. In the early 1990 seconds, she began teaching acting again. This time not as a career but as a calling. Her classes weren't just about performance. They were about truth. "If you're not willing to break," she would tell her students, "you're not ready to act." Among those who came to learn were Sandra Bullock, Liza Minnelli, Barbra Streisand, and Roseanne Barr, each of them finding in Sally a rare mentor who spoke to the soul, not the ego. Her workshops were part acting studio, part spiritual ceremony. Between monologues, she taught meditation, breathwork, and vulnerability, the kind of raw honesty that Hollywood often hides. "Acting," she once said, "is not pretending. It's remembering who you really are." Around that same time, Sally became an ordained minister, joining the Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, a New Age community that believed in soul transcendence. She also helped establish the Insight Transformational Seminars, a program dedicated to personal healing and self-discovery. Students described her as radiant, fierce, and deeply compassionate. A woman who could see through your mask within seconds. But she didn't only preach spirituality. She lived it. Sally devoted her time to volunteering, helping people living with AIDS, cancer, and heart disease, serving food to the homeless with the Red Cross, and visiting prisoners, especially young offenders. Hollywood might have forgotten her, but humanity had not. Still, beneath her newfound serenity, there was always the artist. She continued to appear in films, small, independent projects, cameos, or roles in shows like Criminal Minds and Roseanne. To her, the size of the role never mattered. What mattered was connection, that fleeting moment when an audience felt less alone. By her 60s, Sally had become something few in Hollywood ever achieve, not just a performer, but a teacher of courage, a vessel of empathy. Fame fades, she once said softly, but spirit endures. And though she seemed unstoppable, time was waiting, as it always does, to test even the strongest spirit. By the time she reached her 80s, Sally Kirkland had lived a dozen lifetimes. Yet even the strongest spirits eventually yield to the body's quiet rebellion. In the autumn of 2025, her friends began to notice something was wrong. She was forgetting names, losing track of time, repeating stories she had told 100 times before. Dementia had begun to cloud the sharp, fiery mind that once commanded every room. Then came the fall. It happened in her bathroom, a sudden, brutal slip that fractured 4 vertebrae in her neck, broke her right wrist, and shattered her left hip. The pain was excruciating, but what followed was worse. Infection, exhaustion, and the slow realization that recovery might never come. She was admitted to a hospital in Palm Springs, the desert city she had chosen years earlier for its stillness and sunlight. Doctors did what they could, but her body had grown too frail. Friends rallied around her, launching a GoFundMe campaign to help cover her medical costs. The donations came with messages of love from fans around the world, actors, students, and strangers who had once been touched by her words. "She gave me courage when I had none," one wrote. "She made me believe I was enough." By early November, she was moved into hospice care, her condition deteriorating but her spirit undimmed. Visitors recalled her cracking small jokes, smiling when someone mentioned Anna, and insisting she was ready for whatever comes next. At 1:50 a.m., on the 11th of November 2025, Sally took her final breath. Her representative, Michael Green, broke the news to the press later that morning. She will be deeply missed. The message was simple but carried the weight of a generation that had just lost one of its most fearless performers. Actress Jennifer Tilly was among the first to post a tribute. She was funny, feisty, vulnerable, and self-deprecating. She never wanted anyone to say she died. She said, "Tell them I've gone back to the spirits." Hollywood responded with silence, the kind reserved for legends. The lights dimmed, the applause faded, and the woman who once dared to bare her soul before the world slipped away, peacefully, under the desert sky. But her story doesn't end there. For Sally Kirkland, legacy wasn't about fame. It was about the echoes she left in every artist brave enough to tell the truth. The desert was quiet the morning after Sally Kirkland's passing. The sun rose over Palm Springs the way it always did, soft, golden, almost reverent. In that light, her absence felt larger than life. For more than 6 decades, she had stood for something that Hollywood often forgets: the courage to be unapologetically human. Over the course of her extraordinary career, Sally Kirkland appeared in more than 200 films and television projects. She shared the screen with Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Barbra Streisand, Kevin Costner, Jim Carrey, and so many others, yet she was never just another name on the poster. She was the soul of every scene. Even when the role was small, she filled it with intensity that demanded attention. Her friends remembered her as generous, chaotic, and profoundly kind. Her students called her a fire disguised as a teacher. She taught them to cry without shame, to laugh without restraint, to act without masks. To Sally, the truest performance was one where you forgot the performance entirely. When tributes poured in after her death, they didn't just mourn a celebrity, they celebrated a force of nature. The Actors Union SAG-AFTRA called her a fearless performer whose artistry and advocacy spanned more than 6 decades. Colleagues spoke of her spiritual depth, her fierce loyalty, and the quiet grace with which she accepted every rise and fall. And then there was her own philosophy, the line that has since become a final epitaph: repeated across social media and press headlines alike. Don't say Sally died. Say Sally has gone back to the spirits. It is a sentence that feels entirely hers, defiant, poetic, free. The same energy that carried her from the smoky coffee houses of New York to the bright chaos of Hollywood still lingers in every memory, every frame, every student she ever guided. As the screen fades to black, one truth remains. Sally Kirkland did not just live for art, she was art. A woman unafraid of truth, unafraid of failure, unafraid of herself. Her story reminds us that real beauty doesn't come from perfection, but from fearlessness. So tonight, wherever you are, raise a silent toast to the actress who dared to be different and never once looked back. If you believe in honoring legends who changed Hollywood forever, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of courage, brilliance, and unforgettable grace.